back. We're working on a pedal board here for my friend Jeremy, and we're almost done with power, partially done with audio. So let's get into it. So I'm just attaching a few new DC cables that I had wired in. I tried to use all of the provided stuff with the True Tone, but the cables are just not long enough for this style board and kind of the configuration that Jeremy already had. So we had to bring in some of our custom length DC connectors, which are a little longer than what is provided. I think ours are 42 inches long, whereas I think the max size on a True Tone is maybe like 32 or maybe 36 inches. You can see I got like kind of an elaborate system where I've used painter's tape to indicate which pedals were going to which power supply taps, and then indicating if there's any 18-volt taps that I need to account for, which will go to the two 18-volt outputs on. And the way I've indicated that just with all this cable is I've just put some blue painter's tape on the end of the two that are 18 as well, and just written 18 so I know not to accidentally put something else there that shouldn't be there. Got that one wired in. Alright, I got a couple guys up here that are going to terminate to this side, and then I got two 18s They're going to come in from this side. We talked about this a little bit in some of the other videos, but normally what I do is I always start with the molded end inside of the pedal, and then I resolder and re-terminate at the power supply end, since this is a little bit more protected. And the strategy that I use is I just put the power supply end, I put in a plug, and then that way I can really measure the length that the cables need to be going right into the power supply, so that I don't have any extra slack, and I can really make those measurements as exact as possible. So I just take off the rest of the housing and I just have it kind of partially sitting in there so I can measure right into the power supply, and I have gives me a pretty much perfect cut every time. So these two 18 ones are pretty simple since they're already pretty much there. So I'm just kind of measuring to the tip. I'm cutting it. And then I can, I'll just start soldering these right away. Now, one thing that should be mentioned on any of the True Tone stuff is I noticed that from batch to batch that the wire that represents the positive is changing. So on some batches, the red wire will be the positive, and on other batches, the black wire will be the negative. Now, for most of us, this wouldn't matter because we would never open it up and re-terminate it. But if you are, you're definitely going to want to use your DVM and buzz out what wire's what. So let's see, black wire. I think this is the. It's not. Alright, so in this case, that is the positive. Okay. I'm just going to solder this one first since I know what it is. I take my third hand here. I'm going to tin the connector as well. I cut off some of my excess that I don't need on the shielding there. I'm kind of bending the wire in place just so I can have minimal time with the iron on it. And then I'm just going to crimp the strain relief, put on the back of the housing. I'll zip tie it once. Then I got the one for the phaser, or sorry, the flanger done. That's one of our 18 volts, and the other 18 volts is going to the buffer and the the EP booster. So let's check the polarity on that guy. All right, so on this one, the black wire, okay, it's the same. So black wire is ground. Just tinning the wires first. Pulling out my wire snips, I'm just going to open the strain relief slightly here just so I give myself a little room to work. Once it goes into the third hand, just tinning the plug. I have a lot of excess of the shield here, so I'm just going to cut through that away. Or I guess in this case it's really just another center conductor, it's not really a shield. Center conductor. Just got a little extra I'm going to trim off. Get it one more time. Yep. The backing. And I'll put a zip tie just to make sure everything stays together, even though it's pretty protected in there.
Mace.
And then, hey, I'm on the stream. Okay, have fun. All right. Let's see how our fit is. There's one. There's two. All right. Those look good. You got 4 more now. So I'm going to bring in these 4 guys over to these 4 on this side, and then we should be done with all the power. And I've already done some of the audio already, reusing some cables that Jeremy provided or that I already shortened to length. But we'll get into that next, but we'll break for a moment for any of the questions that have come up. It's not vertical anymore. Yeah, it was vertical. I guess that if you start any process vertically, it just stays there. So, Christian, my board is finally taking shape. Making patch cables is way simpler than I thought. I'd wish I'd done it sooner. Tagged you on Instagram post. I'll definitely take a look. Lonnie, finally able to catch a live feed. Okay, well, and you know the future, you're 16 hours ahead. The DCNs you use are always Kobicon. Yeah, I typically use Kobicon. There's a couple of other companies that make some that are similar, but I don't know their names off the top of my head. Ryan McKinley, this is for my friend Jeremy Miller. He was one of the first customers that I ever had, and he had the board for a while, and this is kind of a revamp of that board with some newer stuff on it that wasn't on the original board, so that's what we got going on here. AKKUN, Akun. Hi, Doc. Is the Fender Engine Room PSU good? It looks good on paper. I haven't seen one. I reached out to Fender about reviewing one, and I never heard back from them. So I presume that either they didn't have them, or they weren't interested, or I talked to the wrong person, or all of the above. I'm not sure. I saw a few videos where you installed a flat surface on top of a pedal train board What do you recommend looking for something lightweight and not too expensive? In those cases, I used, in one case I used plywood. That's more expensive, or sorry, more weight, but less expensive. And in another case, I just did a aluminum sheet on top of it that was like maybe the thickness of a pedal enclosure, um, or like the thickness of our risers. And then I just drilled it in and used that. So I've done that before too. So either way. Um, Phil McKnight. I don't know. What about Phil McKnight? Loving the EVH gear on the board. Yeah, there's plenty of that. Do you set flux capacitor to 1.2 gigawatts? I've purchased some power cables recently that have an inline choke on them. Are these really necessary? Can I cut them back when cutting to length? You're talking about like some of them that have, you know, like little beads on them and stuff like that. For those type, I probably wouldn't mess with them. Sometimes there can be a reason that they're there. So I wouldn't cut it past that. In case there is some circuitry in there that is required, or is that it's maybe shielding some noise, stuff like that. So I leave that alone. But these are all DC. Typically stuff like that is AC. There is some DC stuff I guess I can think of, but I wouldn't do that. I would try to figure out a better powering solution that actually works for what you have. Bent Tom, my pleasure. How many plugs do you buy at a time? Usually for this sort of stuff, since I don't build pedal boards for a living, I just kind of do it when I have time and for friends and stuff like that. I usually have them buy them, so I'm not typically buying the plugs. So I don't know. Klon TS10, overhyped pedals. I don't know. I mean, I guess if people are willing to pay it, then it's not overhyped. Playing flying real low over there. I think the TS10s are good. I think that they're expensive now relative to what they were, but I don't know. I guess like if there was a limited number of full tone OCDs, we would be seeing the same. You know, you could just substitute a different model name in there for it, and the same phenomenon would happen, I think. When there's like a good pedal and there's limited quantities, or that's no longer made, that creates that scarcity. For the quad Vertex, since it has vents on the bottom, would you use risers to keep it? I don't understand what this question is saying. For the quad Vertex, since it has the vents on the bottom, would you use risers to keep it on a solid surface? David, I don't understand the question about the Vertex quad and vents. Can you clarify that? This will be saved. You're on the channel. Yes. Hello from the Philippines. Hello, Nino. When supplying power to a pedal, can you give it too much and damage it, like a Chalk's 18 volt for a 9 volt pedal? Yes, you can damage it. If it doesn't take 18 volts, don't put 18 volts into it. I think there's a lot of people that just start trying different voltages and aren't actually looking at their manuals, or somebody on the gear page told them to do that. You know, the guy at the gear page isn't gonna give you your money back if you cook your pedal. Let's see. Can you recommend a power supply with all power at 500 milliamps? Yeah, Chalk's. Kevin, any recommendations on ABS laminate for plywood for flatboard? Can't quite afford a GOMC. There's a place here that you can buy like ABS from called Tap Plastics, and I think it's all over America, but you could just buy sheets of ABS. It's a countertop material. Sometimes you can even find places that sell countertops that can cut you already pre-laminated Formica, or typically I wouldn't use ABS on the part that the pedal adheres to, because it's a petroleum-based product, so it doesn't take adhesives very well. This top on here, which is kind of more glossy, this is Let me loosen this up a little bit. This surface is called Phylon. And then Formica is kind of more matte comparatively to this. And either of them, they're both countertop style kind of materials, but they're very inexpensive. Okay, we were talking about the quad cortex. Let me go back to this question. For the quad cortex, since it has vents on the bottom, which use risers to keep it off a solid surface. Well, if you're using the type of Velcro that we use, two sides of it, like two sides of this, are going to give you some air for ventilation. So I don't think that would be necessary for that. I think they're presuming that you're going to use it on a pedal board. So I wouldn't hesitate to put it down on a pedal board. I wouldn't consider putting risers on it. Hey Sean, looking forward to any demo you'll do of the Steel String Supreme SRV. What do you think about the 40th anniversary TS9 coming out? I don't know anything about it. TS9s are good though. If you use a Vertex boost to buffer my whole pedal board, where would the expression pedal be in my signal chain? Is there a way to have it after my ODs but before my wet effects? So wherever the boost is wired is where the expression pedal is. So if the boost is in series after your distortion devices but before your wet effects, that's where the boost is going to be, that's where the buffer is going to be, that's where the expression pedal is going to be. Dean, you're welcome. Travis Cook, just finished my board last weekend based on your recommendations, learned a lot now and have one hell of a pedal board. Nice. I use a Fender Engine Room LVL 12 and love it. It's better than Chalk's DC10 it used to be on my other board. Josh Blake, what is a very general process of making a pedal that can take 9 volts and 18 volts? The general process of making a pedal that can take 9 volts and 18 volts for more headroom. Well, it can just be a component choice that you choose that can accept that voltage is sometimes as easy as that. Sometimes the components that sound best won't operate at that voltage. And there's things that you can do to allow it to take the headroom, but I don't usually find 18 volts to be advantageous in most cases, because if you just had your, if your sweet spot setting was a certain, configuration or positioning of knobs at 9 volts, and then you moved it to 18 volts, you won't be able to get that same saturation because you just doubled your headroom. And so now you have to go more extreme on your controls in order to get kind of that same amount of saturation. So ordinarily, I don't find it to be as much of the panacea that some people seem to think it is. I feel like if a pedal really sounds better at that internal voltage, like our boost, then we just make it that internally and it just takes 9 volts. That kind of standardizes it with most of the power supplies. G Dansk Jam. Would you explain the difference between your Musicom Labs preference and values and the RJMs? The output impedance on both of them is about the same. I think they're right at around 100 ohms. So their ability to drive capacitance on the output is about the same, whether it's RJM or Musicom. The difference is that RJM prefers a lower input impedance, which is about half of what most guitar amps would be. So almost any tube amp is going to be 1 meg, unless it's like an old Gibson or something like that. Those are 500K. And RGM chooses 500K, so half 1 meg, and most amps are 1 meg, and so that's what Musicom Lab chose. So Musicom Lab is going to react, as far as your pickups are concerned, more similarly to what your guitar would sound like plugged into the amplifier, whereas the RGM is going to be a little bit more loaded since it's half the input impedance of what a normal guitar amp is. So if you're used to and attuned to or calibrated to hearing your guitar plugged into your tube amp, 99.9% of tube amps, the RJM is not going to sound like that. It's going to sound a little bit more rolled off. It's going to sound a little darker. whereas the 1 meg is going to sound a little bit more like neutral. You know, and no product is going to get you totally to neutral. There's always going to be some color, but I'd say it's going to do the minimal amount of damage comparatively. Let's see, where are we? Sean, looking forward to the demo. A good pedal, a pedal is good when your wife encourages you to buy it. Yeah, that is a good one. Yeah. Let's see, Sam, I followed your advice and I'm waiting to get 2 buffers. Great. And then the next question from Gdansk Jam. Do you like the LA sound design buffer interface? I think that there's some things about it that are good. I think that the buffer it's like a decent quality, like certainly better than any pedal buffer as far as the buffer inside of it. But it's just on the input. So you have a buffer first, and then I think that everything else is passive. So you have the input buffer, and then the outputs are passive, and then you have the transformer isolation. It's a very high-end transformer with the Jensen. I would say that it's a great transformer. It is not necessary for this sort of thing, and I think a lot of the expense of that interface is because of how expensive that transformer is. I don't know. It's reasonable given the volume that they're making and the quality of the parts. So I'm not saying that it's overpriced, but I'm saying that that transformer, which I think I have one of them here. I think they're using the JT11P, this transformer. So it's pretty big. So it kind of sets like the size firstly. And even the guy that designed that transformer, his name is Bill Whitlock, would even tell you that this is an inappropriate transformer for that application. Not because it sounds bad, but it's sort of like for guitar stuff, a lot of these Jensen transformers are really made to be at the input of an amplifier, not on a pedal board driving 20 feet or more of cable and then into the amplifier. So, you know, we have this weird application that most transformers don't really make a transformer for, and so using stuff that maybe isn't as sexy but is like kind of more pedestrian, like these triad transformers, I actually think you can get them to sound as good or better, and these are like $8 and this one is like $80. So you know, it's a nicer transformer in the right context. For this context, for guitar stuff, single-ended systems, you know, low voltage stuff with the guitar pedals, and then it's just not ideal. It's not like it's bad. It's just like it's overkill for this, and it doesn't address fully even what we're doing. But the buffer, I don't have anything against. It's just only an input buffer, so you're relying on the last pedal that has a buffer, or the last pedal that's on, to drive the line back. And I think that that's probably the place that I would say that if I were to give him feedback, not that he cares what I think, but it would be that he just put another one of those input buffers on the outputs so that you get the same quality input buffer on both the outputs. But I think it's a 1 meg 100 ohm input and output impedance on that one. So I think that in terms of that, it's fine. And I think the vintage modern switch, that I don't know if that's just adding capacitance, or maybe that's that could be also be changing the input impedance. It could be changing it from 500, you know, to one meg. I don't know. I haven't really investigated that part of it, but I think it's good. I just think you would have to just make sure you had a high quality output buffer, like a Strymon or something like that, that a low output impedance that could drive everything back, and could work well. But yeah, nothing against it. I just think, yeah, just the output buffer is really the only drawback I can see. Yeah, the EP booster can take 9 or 18 volts. I think it just depends on whether you feel like it's clipping. If you feel like you want it to be cleaner, obviously 18 volts would be better. Stratosexual. Do you think I need a buffer at the entrance of the effects loop? I have a buffer at the beginning of my chain and in front of my amp and at the end of my effects loops. Yeah, so you don't need one in the front. Really, the amp should have that, because by the time you get to the pedal board, you've already seen all that capacitance. So because it's gone from the send, again, let's pretend send's unbuffered from send going 20 feet or whatever it is to your pedal board, and then the buffer after it's not really helping you. It's not helping you resolve the 20 feet that came before it. So this is why having a device like, I don't know if I have one here, like the, oh, I do, like this. Having a device like the clinulator, basically this plugs in and makes your passive loop become an active one. So it's got 4 jacks. So you got an input and an output. This connects to the send and return in your amp. And then this becomes the new send and the new return. And this just kind of like lives on top or behind your amp. And then you have a level for send, you have a level for return, and then you have like this recovery, which is kind of like an EQ type thing. And then you got some little EQ toggles that you can engage. And this basically will turn any passive loop into an active loop. And you can even attenuate again on the send if you have stuff that is instrument level, and you have a line level signal coming in, you can bring that down, and then you can make it back up on the return and bring it back up to instrument level. So something like this is really cool. We did a video about the value of having a buffered effects loop and why you would consider getting one. I think that this could be a good tool for you if you really want to buffer it properly. Rich, you bought a B9 electro-harmonics pedal and put it on my pedal board first in line off the guitar, and it makes a high piercing sounding. Idea what's going on. I would try it by itself first and ensure that it's not doing that. It could be something going wrong with cables. It could be that you have the wrong type of power supply that's running on it. Those are all possible things, especially like if it's underpowered. Sometimes you can see some weird performance issues. Marcus, does 18 volts really do anything when it comes to buffers, compressors? Yeah, I mean, it can do things. It can give them more headroom. For something like a buffer, that could be a benefit. Our buffers already run at, well, it depends on the one, but the buffers that we make are usually 12 volts rail to rail. So it's about 24 volts. Internally, but just 9 on the input. There's some like the Creation audio ones that we recommend as a DIY solution, and those can take up to 36 volts. Now you're probably not going to clip it even at 9, but if you really were running a super hot signal and you were concerned about it, you could run it higher and see what it does. But yeah, it's just going to give you more headroom, and it's going to give you some more clarity, and it's going to take longer to get that sweet spot. But if you're not finding that your stuff is clipping, you may not need to do that. It may be completely unnecessary. I feel like it's overemphasized as far as the benefits. What dip switch settings do you use in an EP booster? Usually, if it's me, I just set it to the one where it can be unity gain, because there wasn't a whole lot of boost in the Echoplex. There's a little bit, but not. I think on this one, the way that it's set now, if it's just on, it's like like a 6 dB boost or something like that, or a little more than that, even if the volume knob's all the way off. Have you ever used a 2 Notes Cab M Plus for a direct setup? Does it work well? Yes. Check out our Steel String Supreme demos. Those are using the 2 Notes Cab M. Matthew. Am I saying that right? Hope so. Hi, I only have one buffer. Should I put it at the beginning of or the end of the chain? Or is it useless if I don't have one at the beginning? No, it's not useless. I think it depends if you have other stuff that maybe is always on. So like, let's say like in this pedal board, right? Let's say on this pedal board, let's pretend that everything here is true bypass, and most of it is actually. Let's pretend that everything is true bypass and you only have one buffer that's a dedicated buffer, right? And let's pretend, in the signal path here, it's going into the interface, or actually it's going into the tuner, then wah full, which is like a fixed wah. But let's pretend that this first pedal is something that's always on all the time. And it's got a 1 meg input impedance on this thing. Maybe the output impedance here won't matter so much. And it's the second thing in the chain, and this is a true bypass tuner, and this is always on. Like, having an input buffer here wouldn't really help you, because the input buffer is loading the pickups and then it's going to one pedal before it gets another buffer, and so it's sort of defeating the value of the input buffer here. I would say if that's the case, then just having a buffer at the end would be fine, because you're basically having this cover your input buffer by being on all the time, providing a 1 meg input impedance load because only a tuner is before it, which isn't affecting the sound when it's off if it's true bypass. And then if we had a true bypass pedal at the end like this and we didn't want to have, any tone suck, I would put the buffer at the end. But if you don't have that, then it could change the way that you would configure the pedal board. So I think it depends on what you have on the board, what pedals might already be buffered, or what pedals are almost always on that could affect the overall sound. Sam, I built a custom 24 by 14 inch dual level wood hinged with integrated pedal board on top with on off stomp switch, power input cord. Wow, sounds great. I'm using the MS3. Thoughts on the best 3 pedals to augment? I'd say typically the drives are where that's the weakest. Levi, how important are milliamps? Well, if you don't have enough of them, your pedal's not going to work right. So, important. You want to make sure that you at least have the minimum number that the pedal requires to power your pedals. Sanders, I have a Polytune 3 as my input pedal and a Sansamp DI driver and a radial JDI as outputs. Is there any need for a buffer in the signal chain? Well, if the Polytune 3 is the bona fide one, then that will be your input buffer. If you're going direct, then you're already going to be low impedance. Let's see. Stratosexual, you're welcome. Did you go to school for EE or just learn by doing? I don't have an electrical engineering degree. I think I showed this last time that my diploma, which is over here, which is signed by Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is the only thing I can say that's cool about it, is actually in sociology. I did take engineering classes. I can't put this up now. I can't put it back up. But yeah, so I started doing some engineering classes. I did some in community college. I didn't get a degree in that. And kind of by the time that I realized what I wanted to do, it was kind of one of those things where there weren't a lot of opportunities to do analog stuff like this at the university that I was going to, even if I wanted to do this sort of stuff. And so, what I started doing was, taking the stuff that I learned, which was actually, I think I got a better education in community college, honestly, doing electronics than I did, or I would have gotten anywhere else in this particular vein, because this was kind of more on the level that they were teaching there. And then really spending a lot of time like learning how to modify pedals, learning how to repair pedals, learning how to repair amplifiers, learning the basics about tubes, and actually doing repairs, I think, was the most invaluable thing. You just kind of get to see a lot of stuff that goes wrong. You get to learn about how to sort of calibrate what people are saying when they say some sort of adjective to describe the tone that they want, and there's not really like a technical equivalent of that, and so you start to create this lookup table of what it means when somebody says they want it to be more X or more Y, and what that could possibly mean and how that might translate to a pedal. So I was glad that I got time to learn that stuff in sort of a low pressure environment. Got to do a lot of kind of technician level work, and then most of the stuff, I think most real engineers would just like kind of laugh at the simplicity of this. This is like all this stuff that we're doing here is like 70 years old or more. So no, I don't have an electrical engineering degree. I have a degree in sociology. It was the path of least resistance, and where I had the most credits, where I could graduate from a decent level university. Eddie, toying with the idea of an interface plate on the side of my pedal board. Is it possible to make a power jack that takes the True Tone one spot plug and connects the daisy chain inside the board? I mean, you just have to make a pass through, basically. So you'd have like 9 volts going through. So you could do that. So yes, you could. Zochiwa, Happy New Year. Sean, what's up? Finally catch one of these live. Happy New Year's. All right, thanks, Sean. I'll be down in LA next week so I can grab all your stuff. Do you cut your power cables to length or do you standard lengths? Yeah, everything's cut to length, and that's what we're doing right now. We'll get back to it in a minute. I have a tuner at the end of my board. A peer saw it and said that I was crazy. Your thoughts? I have a tuner. Yeah, I wouldn't put it at the end. I'd put it first. It'll be way more accurate too, the closer it is to the beginning of the chain. Beavis, your sister's a sociology major. Yeah, I don't know that I would say that I necessarily love sociology. It was kind of one of those things that I had transferred to this university, and that was kind of like where I could graduate on the timeline, the 4-year timeline that I wanted. And so I knew that what I wanted to do, was sort of had to sort of be invented. So I didn't really treat the degree as a vocational thing. I just kind of treated it as a piece of paper. If everything went bad, I'd have I'd have something decent to fall back on. And then the 2007 and 8 recession hit, right as I graduated. Okay. Tarina, videography. Would it be okay if I use 2 Boss digital delays and the bona fide buffer at the last of the chain? Well, I wouldn't use Boss pedals as my buffers. I would just use them because you like the sound, not because they're buffers. And I would use the true or the bona fide buffer first, unless you have some other input buffer. Sam, what output on the one spot should I use for an EP booster? Well, you can either use the 9 volt or you could use the 18 volt. Either one will work. Mom, Mom, are you on YouTube? Since I use an Ishik Stomp as an amp, an output buffer won't be beneficial, correct? Well, it'll still see the output capacity. You still have capacitance to drive, but I think at the end of the day, you'd have to do a test, I guess. You'd have to do a test to see how much the buffer would impact it. If you have another buffer you can throw in there, I think the output impedance on the line 6 is like 500 or 600 ohms, so it's not amazing, but it's better than most. Caleb, I know an EE from Northrop Grumman has no personality. He could have used a sociology class, and they probably say that about the sociologists. I think that one person in one of my classes said like sociologists just like they just point out problems, but they don't really do anything to solve them. I kind of thought that was true. Sam, I went with a Fender compressor L1, almost always on, Boss BD2W, Loop 2, and an EP Booster L3. Okay. Yeah, that'd be a good choice for the MS3. Beavis. Sounds familiar. She never worked in the field. Yeah. Josue, delay and reverb with a buffer, please. Are you asking me for some, or that's this your setup? Are the Temple Audio X4 mod a decent buffer? He's kind of doing like the Klon buffer, is my understanding from when I had last seen them. I don't know if that's changed. Klon is a wonderful overdrive pedal. It's a bad buffer. Anything with a TLO 72 for a buffer is bad. It's bad if you care about transparency. It's like the most colored op amp of all time. Like, it's great in overdrive. Like, that color is beautiful in an overdrive or a distortion. But when you use it in a buffer, it's not linear. You can't really run them lower. I think the spec sheet from TI, I'm pretty sure you can't run it lower than 1K. So you can't even run it down to 100 ohms where it's stable. I've even seen situations in certain conditions where they invert the op amp, so it's not a good deal for that application. So is it a decent buffer? Well, if you like the color, and some people do like the color, then fine. If your goal is linearity, you just want exactly what you've designed, soundscaped on the board, and then put that to the amp with as little color as possible. I would not recommend a Klon style buffer. But some people do like that sound, so you may like it, and you may be like, hey, like, I want to have a little bit of this color to my sound, and I really like that. And if you do, then it's fine. But if you want it to be really linear, I wouldn't go for it. Beavis, 10 years ago, I built a BYOC digital ping pong delay. It had an 18-volt option, and it says it provides more headroom. I know what headroom is, but how would it apply to a delay circuit? Well, you can still overdrive a delay if you hit it hard enough, just like you can overdrive a clean amp if you hit it with enough output coming into it. So it just gives you a little bit more clarity on the repeats. potentially, and maybe makes it sound a little bit more. Maybe it would make it sound a little bit more clear, a little less dark potentially. But again, I think if something's designed to run at 18 volts, you should just make it 18 volts. I don't know. It seems to me like I don't make the pedal with. I guess I shouldn't say I don't. I've made a pedal that could take between 9 and 18 volts, and then I realized that I should just make it the way that it sounds best. And then if somebody doesn't like the way that I cook my steaks, then I'm not the right chef for them. James, I'm running my bass rig ampless, and I have a buffer on the input and use a DI on the end. So do I need a second? So I don't need a second buffer. Yeah, if you're going DI out, it's already low impedance if it's balanced, so you're good. All right, let me move my transformers. Got all sorts of transformers here. Let's do a little playing around to figure out which one we should use for our buffer interface box. So let's go back to some power cabling. You can of course keep putting your questions, but we're gonna power down. We got 4 more to go. All right. I think we may need to do a little zip tie action here too, potentially. Let's see what we got. There's one. Two. I'm just going to do a few at a time here just because I want to make sure my length is perfect. So I'll do these 2 and then I'll remeasure the last 2. Now these are using our power cables, so I know that ours are all the same on every model, so I don't need to check the polarity with my multimeter. On some of the true tone ones, as I mentioned, when you strip them out, sometimes, depending on what batch you get, sometimes the red wire can be negative and the black wire can be positive, despite what you might associate with those colors. So now I've just gotten in the habit of checking them all so I don't inadvertently reverse the polarity on a pedal that shouldn't be. And I'm just doing some tinning here, which is just a fancy word of saying that I'm pre-soldering some of the wires here, so it just goes together a little easier, gets a little bit better flow. I'm opening up the strain relief slightly just so I have a little bit more space to work. also tinning this. And with just a little solder on both sides, it makes this really fast just to assemble together. I just really am barely having to reheat anything, and I have a good quality connection. Just trimming off a little of the excess here. I'm gonna recrimp my strain relief there. I know somebody was asking if we make all these to length, and we do. However, you can order these to length if you want to have custom made power cables. I know we offer that over on therigdr.com, and also our partners over at Sweetwater offer custom made versions as well, although they have some stock lengths as well if you're interested in that. I think on the RigDR you can just spec out to the nearest, I think, 1/2 inch what length you want, anywhere from, like, I think the lowest size is maybe like 4 inches, and I think the longest size is 42 inches, and then you can say if you want it to be right angle or you want it to be straight, and then you can get it delivered right to your house. Alright, so done these two. I'm just going to check the fit here, how they go into the supply, and then I'll make my adjustments to the next two. And then we should have all of our power ready to go. That's looking good. Do these two last ones, and we should be ready to go. So on the black conductor, I'm basically just peeling off the insulation right down to the hilt, and then on the red side, which is going to the tip, I'm just taking a tiny bit off, just enough to expose the copper, but enough where I can still have it covered in the insulation so it doesn't have a short against anything. Then after I've got those exposed, I'll tin them, and then I'll repeat on the plug. Again, tin just means sort of like pre-soldering. It's kind of just like starting the process, so it's easier once everything's in place to just kind of reheat the solder and everything just flows perfectly. And I highly recommend, if you haven't watched our channel enough, you solder everything. Your connectors for power, your connectors for your audio. You don't want to be a pervert and get stuck with solderless cables that don't work. Nobody likes that. You want your stuff to work. You want it to sound good forever, not just until you move it again. Yeah, see, by tinning like that, I mean, I'm literally spending less than a second of contact time on the joints. It just reheats it super quick, and I can just get in and out really fast, not putting any excessive heat on the cable or the plug. Alright, those two are done. Just gonna put our backs, zip tie them shut. Now you'll notice here this looks a little messy. We're going to clean this up. Just wanted to make sure that we had a quality entry into the power supply there. We'll do a little zip tie action with some tie down mounts. I think we can do one more in here. To keep it nice and clean. Okay, there we go. So we got it all wired in here nice and neatly. We'll do a little tour. Let's flip this thing around. All right. So they're still pretty nice and neat in there. Every single output is used except for the AC. And I always do this where I kind of mark which pedal is sort of corresponding to which output. And when I'm done with this, I'll usually take some label tape and I'll put it across here that'll just say like 1 is this pedal or 2 is this pedal. So then that way, if anybody else is gonna tech this thing other than me, they know kind of where everything is wired. But I mean, that came in there pretty dang neat. And of course, you got all the nice cable lines. Sometimes when these cables are new, they kind of tend to be a little bit more rigid, especially since they're kind of bundled like this. So they kind of have some bends in them, and they kind of mellow out after a day or two. So it'll even get a little neater as far as the some of these cables, kind of how they come in. They'll kind of start to form together a little bit better after a day. But that's what we're dealing with. So we're done with that, and we're just going to go through and finish the audio. But we'll do some more questions and then maybe wrap for the day. All right, let's see what we got. Let's see. We talked about that. We talked about the bass rig. All right, Braxel, I'm running an H6 stomp out to my effects loop on my amps. Is this device causing tone suck in any way? Some people purport that they hear some tone suck. I don't know that I've heard that exactly, but I think that sometimes inferior buffering can sometimes hurt that. I always buffered the output of it and just left it in the bypass mode, but so I don't know if I've maybe heard it just on its own, but I didn't have that problem, so I know it can be mitigated. Beavis, I'm thinking I'm going to try it out. If I recall correctly, it's just a resistor swap. It depends on the pedal. I think you're talking about the 18 volt thing. Fan of the Disso Plus for direct rigs. I don't know what that is. Disso Plus. Caleb, are soldering the RCA cables difficult for the chocks? No. I think I got some here. I'll show you. I got some of the plugs at least. So here's a right angle end, like this. So it's really pretty much the same. So if we were taking, let's say, here's like a bulk connector, like obviously this is not an RCA side, this is what goes to the pedal. This is the RCA side, this is what goes into the chocks, right? So you got your wires that come through, right? They come through the strain relief, and then you got your ground here, or your sleeve. You got your tip up at the top, is that little solder lug. And it's the same exact technique. The only difference is that ordinarily when you wire 2.1 millimeter barrels for a normal polarity, typically the red insulator goes to the tip, and then the black insulator or the shield would go to the sleeve. But on an RCA, that is reversed. So the standard on the RCA side would be that the red positive side would go to the shield, or the sleeve, and then the tip would be the black wire, or the shield would go to the tip. And so it's basically the same technique, it's just inverted. In a way that you could test it to make sure if you've soldered it and you're not sure, is you could plug it in, don't plug a pedal into it yet, and then take your multimeter, your DVM, and set it to ohms, right? The omega symbol, and then you can test it. Actually, don't set it to ohms. Sorry, set it to DC, DC volts, and then you can measure the polarity and make sure that it measures the same as your other cables. So you don't even have to. You could use one of the existing cables as a reference and see whether it's minus or plus in front of it. Right, so if you're getting minus, then you're going to the other side and you're reading the centers minus, as long as you keep the same color leads or probes on the same exact positions, like tip to tip, ring or tip to tip, sleeve to sleeve on both sides. You can measure it and make sure that it's the same voltage, the same polarity. It's an easy way to do it with just kind of like regular old tools that most of us should have if we're building pedal boards. I think you can get, this guy on Amazon for, or some version of this for $20 or something. So that's how I would do it if you're not sure and you're not able to make a determination just visually as to which way is the right way. But it's very similar to do the chocks. Let's see, we talked about chocks. All right, Tadina, Uncle Mason, please let me know if this is the correct order. Guitar plug straight into Voxwah, then to the stowaway buffer, then to a Peterson strobe tuner in true bypass mode. That sounds good. Or, I mean, you could put the tuner up front, too, and just leave it in true bypass mode. So guitar into tuner and true bypass, then Voxwah, then stowaway. Thoughts on the Donner's white tape delay? I haven't tried it. Who done it? I recently tried out the Earthquaker Swiss Things pedalboard reconciler. Do you have experience with it? Do you have any recommendations? Its uses or for similar pedalboard solutions? Well, it's almost kind of like an elaborate like AB switcher with an effects loop that can bring in and out pedals or the whole entire pedal board. It's kind of just like a pedal board AB box with, I think it has a buffer. The buffer in it wasn't that good. It was kind of like it was like a 1K output impedance, I think. So it's kind of like, around the spec of a Boss buffer. Pat, hey Mason, just picked up the SSS. Absolutely love the versatility and the depth of the pedal. The rock jazz toggle switch is an awesome feature. Thank you, Pat. I appreciate that. Braxel, I'm using the HX Stomp out of my effects loop. I think we talked about that one. Ben H, would you be worried about soldering fumes if soldering often? Well, I mean, I would if I were in an enclosed environment. Like you can see here, my garage door is wide open, and I have a 10-foot by 15-foot opening here. And so I'm not worried about it in this environment. If I were inside or I was in an environment where it was too cold to work outside like this, then you would want to get a fume extractor probably. And those are cheap. You can get a fume extractor for $20 to $50 on Amazon, I think. Josue, the Boss Wazacraft series have better buffers than common Boss pedals. I think that they may use tighter tolerance parts, but the buffer is the same on pretty much every Boss pedal, especially the output buffer. The input buffers, the specs can vary, but it's almost always, I've yet to see, it's pretty standard stuff. Maybe it's tighter tolerance, maybe it's a better quality version of what they have, but their buffer circuit is the same circuit. At what point would you need a noise suppressor on your board? Well, if you think that the noise is untenable and it's not related to other stuff in your system like bad cables or a noisy tube in your amp, then you could start to experiment with it. It's going to affect the tone. Some people will use it to gate around pedals. Some people will use it to gate around a preamp in their actual amplifier itself. So they'll put it like the send and return. If it's a 4-cable method version, they'll put the send and return around the input and the send of the amp effects loop. So the input of the amp and the effects send will be what the gate wraps around. Or they might even include some distortion devices in that. There's other styles like the Fort and Zool where it's just designed to be after the effect send, so after the preamp output, to kind of help gate some of that stuff. I think it depends on what you're trying to gate and what you've assessed as the noise problem. RJ Ronquillo, YouTube royalty. Hello, my friend. Russell, okay, I'm not the only late one. Is that what you said? Cool. Yeah, so I think that we'll do one last board we were working on today. Where are you, Zeke? Where are you, Zeke? Zeke's over there. Zeke, what are you doing? So last look at the board. I think we only have probably another hour or two with this thing. This is pretty cool. I'm going to take off Actually, I'm not going to take these off yet because I want to label the power supply so I know which one of all these it goes to, but guitar is going to come in to the tuner, true bypass, and then it's going to go into the waffle, which is a fixed wah effect made by Full Tone. The reason why we're going true bypass and then to this instead of buffer to this is because I experimented with this. What's going on there, Zeke? That the buffer did affect the sound of this. So we're not going to use the input buffer. Then we're going to go to the phaser, flanger, RC booster, Rockbox boiling point, double barrel, EP, carbon copy, chorus in stereo to Eventide micro pitch in stereo to RV7 in stereo to the buffer stereo out. And then that's the board. So if you dug it, if you like these live things, you can give us a thumbs up. That goes a long way in helping other people find this sort of information. You're welcome to share it. And if you have any other questions that I didn't take during the course of the stream, you can of course put those in the comments section below. And Zeke is starting to get restless. I think he's ready for a WALK. I can't say that because it's a trigger word for him. But thank you all for joining me this Friday night. Have a wonderful weekend. See you later.